To all those people watching, I'd like to remind everyone that this video is not made for kids. It's for older fans and adults. Enjoy the fucking video!
Fergus is a railway traction engine. He's like Trevor, but could run only on rails. Many years ago he used to work at the cement works on the Kirkronan branch line, but had helped out with the other engines when work wasn't too busy. But one day, Fergus had an accident at the quarry on Thomas's branch line by being buried underneath some rock that had fallen from a nearby cliff face. The accident had damaged Fergus, including his flywheel, and the cement works didn't have enough money to mend him at the time, and put him up for sale. Thankfully, Sir Charles Topham had bought him, and after he was repaired at the works, he was working in the station yard at Tidmouth, shunting coaches and trucks for the big engines would fill up the box cab diesel, and he still does today.
Hello everybody! Welcome to the island of Sodor.
Fergus is a very rule-abiding engine, and he would stand for no nonsense for the big engines, but lately there has been some trouble on the Northwestern Railway. Some teenagers had been vandalizing the station and yard. They had been graffitiing the walls of the engine shed. "Hey, you!" shouted Fergus. The teens heard him and ran away before they got caught. Another time he saw them on the railway line throwing ballast onto the track to see if they broke. Some of them did, but some of the loose pieces had been hitting the engines. "Ouch!" they cried. Some of the loose pieces ended up giving them scratched paint or dents. But the teenagers didn't care. They just carried on throwing ballast onto the rails. That was until... Oi! The driver jumped down to try and catch them, but they were too fast as they raced out of the yard and towards the car park near the big station. Fergus kept on seeing them being a nuisance around the station, causing trouble to the property there as well as the passengers. But try as he might, the troublesome children kept on getting away from him. "Oh, kids these days," Fergus grouched. "That's the problem with the summer holidays," sighed his driver. "There are some kids out there that are bored and have nothing to do, and think being troublemakers is fun. One of these days they'll get their own back." "They better," replied Fergus crossly. "I had it chasing those kids around like a headless chicken. Come on, let's get back to work." Fergus arrived at the sheds feeling tired and annoyed by the troublesome teenagers. He began complaining about it towards the other engines. "I don't know what's wrong with children this day and age. I'm convinced that all of them are bad." The other engines understood Fergus's words, but they didn't agree with his generalization of them being bad. "There are bad kids, Fergus," replied Henry. "But there are good ones too." "Like what?" questioned Fergus. "Well, look at all the children who had come to see us over the years thanks to the television show, Fergus," replied Geoffrey. "Pah! That doesn't mean a thing," replied Fergus crossly. "Any kid would be bad." The other engines knew straight away that Fergus would be very headstrong on the subject, so they dropped the argument and went to sleep instead. Later, as the engines were sleeping, there was the sound of a siren. "Oh!" they gasped. "What was that?" Fergus was woken up by it too, and he could see from the shed roof a mysterious orange glow flickering in the distance. Fergus, nor the other engines, knew what it was. "We'll probably know what it is in the morning. It's too late to investigate it now." And so they did. Fergus soon found out the next morning The signal box was on fire! That must have been the orange glow! He gasped. The firefighters had put out the blaze while the engines were asleep, and luckily no one was inside the building. But the signal box was destroyed. However, after some inspection, they found that it could be repaired. The fat controller came to see his engines at the sheds. Due to the damage of the signal box, he declared, it'll be out of commission and repairs will have to wait until we could gather some funds. Meanwhile, all of you will have to be flagged in and out of the station. So while the engines were being flagged through by the station staff, Fergus, however, was feeling suspicious. This was no accident, he said to his driver. This is an act of sabotage and I know who's responsible for this mess. His driver knew he was referring to, but then he said, but we can't prove that it was those rotten kids that have been causing havoc to our railway. But Fergus was determined. Later, a detective came to see if this was an act of sabotage. Fergus rolled up towards her. Excuse me, detective, he whistled. The detective turned towards him. Is there anything the matter? She asked. Indeed there is, detective. I know who did this. There are these 3 kids who are causing trouble to us in the yards and the passengers at the station in the past few weeks, and they did this as well. They've gone too far this time, detective. Right. Now, do you know their names? Asked the detective. Names? I don't know, replied Fergus. Well, I can't have suspects without any names, Fergus. But I think I will talk with Sir Topham Hatt about this and see if he could provide any background on those 3 kids you had mentioned. Thank you, Fergus. Hope you have a good day. And the inspector went off to further investigate the matter. Fergus just huffed and he stormed away to do his work. But he believed that it was those 3 kids, and with that he was convinced that all kids are bad no matter how nice they are. Kids these days don't respect the rules or property of the railway. It's undignified that kids in this day and age can get away with all the trouble they cause. You never see this kind of delinquent behaviour back in the good old days. Oh yes, back then kids were respectful when it came to railways, Fergus sighed nostalgically. Back then we were like the merry kings and queens, but now we're treated like rubbish. The other engines were cross with Fergus's rose-filtered nonsense. The good old days, snorted Henry in the station. There had always been bad children in the past too, you know, Fergus. Like what? In case you've forgotten, there was a time some boys had thrown stones on me, my driver, and the carriage windows. I managed to get them back by blowing soot all over them, but it doesn't negate their bad behaviour. Philip agreed, and then told Fergus about the time a gang of youths released the brakes of some trucks he had shunted, and a strong wind blew them out of the yard, nearly colliding with Gordon. Bear had even told Fergus about vandals that had been causing trouble to the line by damaging the signal wires. Fergus huffed away, annoyed that the other engines didn't agree with him and were challenging his viewpoint. But he knew deep down that they were right. Later that day he was shunting more rolling stock around the station. He then saw 2 boys walking around the station platform holding a steel tin asking for money. What a cheek! Scoffed Fergus. First they became troublemakers to us and now they are begging for money like panhandlers. Isn't there something for these kids to do during the summer holidays? They're not panhandling, Fergus, cried his driver. Look! Fergus was surprised when he saw the second child holding a board saying, Please donate to fix Tidmouth signal box. Fergus, however, was a little suspicious, but when they came towards him and saw how serious they were in helping, he smiled, and his driver had placed some money into the tin. Thank you, sir, replied the children. Just then the fat controller came towards Fergus. He then saw the children, smiled, and saw what they were doing. So you're asking people for donations to help fix our signal box that was damaged this morning? He asked. Yes, sir, they answered. Well, that is mighty kind of you. What are your names? Harry, said one. And Oliver, replied the other. Well, Harry and Oliver, we are very glad to accept the funds that you have made. Once you reach your goal, come to my office and we can sort out how much you've raised. Thank you, sir, replied the children happily. Fergus smiled. The fat controller then turned towards him and said, Fergus, there is something I wanted to tell you. Detective Kidd had come into my office earlier in regards to those 3 troublesome teens you mentioned. I'm glad to tell you that they were arrested under suspicion towards the act of sabotage of the signal box, thanks to CCTV cameras we had around the station. We saw 3 figures running on the platform after the signal box had been lit in the background, and believed it was them. Fergus was pleased, but he knew that the teenagers were still under investigation. But later they had admitted the crime and told the police that the whole thing wasn't a deliberate act, and was more as a way to get away from boredom. But they were charged and would let the court decide, leaving their parents feeling very disappointed. The goal by Harry and Oliver was done, and they went to the Fat Controller's office, and thankfully they had enough that would add to the cost of the signal box's repairs. It had taken some time, but soon the signal box was all repaired and was good as new. The Fat Controller had a special ceremony, and Harry and Oliver were the guests of honour, with Fergus putting them on a breakdown with their parents on board. Fergus watched the ceremony with the other engines and attendants as the Fat Controller finished his speech. While the world does have people who would ruin the fun for everyone else, we must be reminded that there are people like Harry and Oliver who are kind and caring and will help out those in need. 3 cheers for Harry and Oliver! And Fergus agreed.